Welcome to In the Shadows. I'm Jack, and tonight's show is all about scary stories to fall asleep. No ads, just a black screen and the sound of rain as you drift off. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in the comments below. I'm always fascinated by where our listeners tune in from, and so grateful you're here. If you enjoy tonight's stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. There will be no breaks, just the rain and the stories. Now, relax and let the darkness guide you. You ever have one of those days that just sticks with you? Like no matter what you do, no matter how much time passes, that day just lingers in your head, playing on a loop. Well, for me, that day was the day my husband died. I know, right? Dark way to start things off, but trust me, it gets worse from here. So yeah, my name's Liz, and I used to think I had the worst luck. I mean, losing Matt was already enough to mess me up for good. But what happened after? That's the kind of thing that changes you, you know? I guess I should start with the morning, because that's when it all felt wrong. It was raining, big fat drops that smacked against the windows like someone was chucking pebbles at the house. I remember waking up to that sound. The alarm went off like usual, but I didn't need it. I'd been awake for a while, just lying there, staring at the ceiling. The kind of staring that comes with a headache behind your eyes. I got out of bed, walked to the window, and there it was, rain, pouring hard. And it was that grayish time of the morning, you know? Not quite day, not quite night. The kids were still asleep, thank God, so I had a few minutes to myself. That was always my favorite part of the day, when it was just me, the quiet, and the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Except this time, I didn't make the coffee. I just stood there, looking out at the rain, feeling like I was trapped inside this thick fog. The worst part? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Now don't judge me too hard, but I didn't immediately think, oh, it's the anniversary of Matt's accident. I wish I could say that I did, but honestly, that memory is like a punch to the gut, and I don't usually let it in until I have to. Most days, I can lock it up in a box and shove it somewhere in the back of my mind. But that day, it broke free on its own. I forced myself to get dressed, which wasn't much. Jeans and a hoodie, my usual uniform for running errands and doing the whole responsible adult thing. The day was already heavy enough without me trying to put on something nice. I mean, who was I kidding? No one cared what I wore. Especially not me. The kids, Jake and Emma, dragged themselves downstairs soon after. They didn't even notice I hadn't made breakfast yet, probably too busy fighting over something dumb like cereal. The rain was pounding even harder now, and for a second I considered keeping them home, but that was just me being lazy. School was their escape. It was mine too, most days. So I loaded them into the car and drove them through town. The streets were slick with rain, and the whole town felt off. You ever just look around and think, something's wrong here, but I can't put my finger on it? That's how I felt driving through Ashford that morning. I dropped the kids off, kissed them goodbye like it was any other day, and headed home. I wish I could say the feeling went away once I got back, but it didn't. If anything, it got worse. I tried distracting myself, cleaning, laundry, the usual stuff, but everything felt heavy. Like the air itself was pressing down on me. My phone buzzed a few times, but I ignored it. I wasn't in the mood for small talk with anyone, not today. And then it happened. The sound I can still hear even now if I let my mind drift back there. The screech of tires, that awful metallic crunch. I don't think I moved at first. Part of me thought I was hearing things, like some cruel joke my brain was playing on me. But then I looked at the clock. 3:17 p.m. That was the exact time Matt's accident happened, a year ago to the day. And I swear on my life, when I ran outside to check, the street was empty. No cars, no people, just the rain pouring down and that horrible ringing in my ears. I stood there, getting soaked, feeling like I was in some kind of nightmare. But it wasn't a dream. I wish it had been. That's how it started. The first time I knew something wasn't right in Ashford. The next morning started the same as any other, or at least that's what I thought. It was raining again, and not just a drizzle. I'm talking full-on, buckets from the sky kind of rain. I rolled over in bed and squinted at the clock. 7:45 a.m. The alarm was going off, blaring that annoying tone I always hated. But something about that morning felt too familiar. At first, I chalked it up to the usual routine. I mean, I've been in that same groove for years. Wake up, get the kids ready, go about my day. Nothing exciting, nothing out of the ordinary. But as I got out of bed, the weight of déjà vu hit me like a brick. I stood by the window, staring out at the rain again. It felt like a replay of yesterday. Same weather, same grayish light, even the same way the drops smacked against the glass. You know when you've had a dream and it sticks with you, but you can't quite figure out why? Yeah, that was the vibe. But this wasn't a dream. I went through the motions, jeans, hoodie, no coffee, and headed downstairs, and wouldn't you know it, Jake and Emma were fighting over cereal. Again. I stopped halfway down the stairs, watching them for a second, like, didn't we just do this? I tried shaking it off. Maybe it was me? Maybe the anniversary of Matt's accident was screwing with my head more than I wanted to admit. Grief does weird things to you. So I dropped the kids off at school like I always did, giving them the usual wave goodbye. That's when it hit me. The same scene. The exact same scene. The rain, the way the school doors opened, the way Jake waved without looking back. I mean, I'm no stranger to routines, but this was like someone pressed rewind and didn't bother to change a thing. I sat in the car for a minute, trying to convince myself I was just overthinking it. But something was gnawing at me. I drove home, taking the same route, and the whole time I kept thinking, this feels wrong, but I can't figure out why. You ever get that feeling, like the world's playing a prank on you? It was like that, but meaner, more twisted. Back at home, the weirdness cranked up a notch. I picked up the laundry basket, just like the day before, only this time I stopped halfway through. I remembered folding that exact shirt that exact way yesterday. The moment I thought that, I froze. No way, I thought. No freaking way this is happening again. But it was, and then 3:17 p.m. rolled around. I wasn't even doing anything at the time, just sitting on the couch, staring at the wall, still feeling off. And that's when I heard it again, the screech of tires, that gut-wrenching crunch. I bolted up and ran outside, my heart racing, hoping, no knowing, I'd find nothing there. And I was right. The street was empty. The rain poured down just like before, and the clock inside my house still read 3:17 p.m. It was happening again. I'm not gonna lie, I felt like I was losing it. Like I was trapped in some twisted version of Groundhog Day, but without the happy, funny parts. It was just the same pain, over and over, the same awful feeling that something was coming, but I couldn't stop it. That night, I stayed up late, trying to piece together what was going on. I didn't tell the kids anything. I mean, what was I supposed to say? Hey kids, Mom's living the same day over and over again, and by the way, it's the day Dad died. Fun, huh? Yeah, no, not gonna happen. I stayed up until almost midnight, thinking maybe if I didn't fall asleep, I could break whatever cycle I was in. But around 12:30, I must have dozed off without realizing it, because the next thing I knew, the alarm was blaring. 7:45 a.m. Rain tapping against the window. The exact same rain. I'm telling you, it was the same. Every detail. I sat up in bed, feeling like I was trapped in some kind of bad joke. 3 days of the same nightmare? No, thanks. I'm good. But there I was, stuck in it anyway. And that's when it really started to sink in. This wasn't just me going crazy. Something was wrong with this town. And I wasn't the only one living in this messed up loop. By the third morning, I wasn't even surprised anymore. The alarm went off at 7:45. The rain was still pouring, like someone upstairs forgot to turn off the faucet, and Jake and Emma were still arguing over the cereal like it was a life or death situation. You'd think living the same day over and over would be enough to make me snap, but honestly, by this point, I was just numb to it. I dragged myself out of bed, threw on the same jeans and hoodie, and tried to pretend that it wasn't happening again. But I wasn't fooling myself. This wasn't some grief-fueled hallucination, no matter how much I wanted it to be. Something was seriously wrong here. I dropped the kids off at school, just like I'd done twice before. Same route, same rain-soaked streets, same dull wave from Jake. It was like watching a broken record spin on repeat. The second I got home, I sat on the couch, staring at the walls, thinking, okay, Liz, what the hell is going on? But of course, no answer came, just the silence of the house and the constant tapping of the rain on the windows. I'm not sure what made me do it, but I decided to head into town. Maybe I just needed a change of scenery, or maybe I was hoping to see if anyone else was noticing the same weirdness. When I got to the diner, Mrs. Clemens was behind the counter, her apron stained with coffee like it always was. She gave me her usual tired smile, and I sat down at the counter. "Same as usual, hon?" she asked, like clockwork. I nodded, because why not? At this point, everything was déjà vu anyway. As she poured my coffee, I started to realize something. There were little differences, cracks in the day. Nothing huge, nothing obvious, but small things. Like how Mrs. Clemens poured the coffee a little too fast this time and it spilled onto the counter. I swear the past 2 days she'd done it perfectly. But today, that spill was new. And then I noticed the clock behind the counter. It was ticking slower. I know that sounds weird, but I swear, the second hand was moving just a little too slow, like time itself was off. I stared at it for a solid minute, just watching that second hand drag itself around the face, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. I left the diner, feeling like I was finally seeing the cracks in the loop, like the day wasn't as perfectly stuck as it seemed. As I walked down Main Street, more little things caught my attention. A streetlight flickered out, something I hadn't seen the day before. The rain, which had been relentless every morning, slowed to a drizzle for a few minutes. And then there was the stray cat, this skinny, black thing I'd never seen before, just sitting on the sidewalk, staring at me like it knew something. I'm not saying I'm a cat person, but that thing freaked me out. It just kept watching me, not moving, not blinking. I walked past it, pretending it wasn't there, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but feel like it was. Part of this. Part of whatever was going on. By the time I got home, I was on edge. And that's when I found the note. Now, I swear to you, I hadn't touched Matt's old jacket in months. It had been sitting on the hook by the front door since before the accident. But that day, when I walked in, there was a piece of paper sticking out of the pocket. My heart, or whatever, I felt my stomach twist a little. The note was short, just a few words scrawled in handwriting I didn't recognize. "They're watching. Find the cracks." I stared at it for a good long while, wondering if maybe I'd finally lost it. I mean, who was watching? What cracks? Was this some sick joke? Or had I really found a way out of this nightmare? I didn't know what to think, but I sure as hell wasn't going to ignore it. That afternoon, 3:17 rolled around, just like it had before. The screech of tires, the crash. Only this time, I didn't run outside. I stayed right where I was, clutching that note, trying to figure out what it meant. The sound came and went, like it always did, but something was different. The note, the cracks, the slow ticking clock. It all added up to something, but I couldn't quite put the pieces together yet. The next few days were more of the same, but the cracks started to grow. The diner clock kept ticking slower. The stray cat showed up more often, always watching, always lurking. And every now and then I'd find another note on my kitchen table, in the laundry basket, even under my pillow once. Always the same message. "They're watching. Find the cracks." Part of me thought about telling someone, maybe Sheriff Miller or Sarah down the street. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I mean, what would I even say? "Hey guys, I'm stuck in a time loop and there's a creepy cat and mysterious notes showing up in my house." Cool, right? Yeah, no thanks. I decided to keep it to myself for now. I didn't want to be the town nut job. But the more I saw those cracks, the more I realized I wasn't the only one stuck in this loop. By the time the 4th or 5th loop rolled around, I honestly lost track. It was like living in some twisted version of reality, where every little detail was just slightly off. The rain, the ticking clock, the damn cat. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle that I couldn't quite put together. But I knew one thing for sure. Those notes weren't just random. Someone or something was trying to tell me something. I started looking for the cracks. Really looking. It became this obsession, like I was Sherlock Holmes in my own messed up mystery, except I had no idea what I was even looking for. Every morning, I'd wake up to the same rain, the same alarm, the same routine, but I'd walk around town with this hyper-focus, hoping something would change. And it did. Little by little. I started noticing people acting strange. Not everyone, but a few folks, like Sheriff Miller. He'd been the town's rock for years, but now he seemed off. He didn't just seem confused, like the rest of us probably were deep down. He seemed almost aware of the loop. He'd stand on the corner of Main Street, not really doing anything, just watching people, like he was waiting for something to happen. Like he knew more than the rest of us. I figured, what the hell? I'd talk to him. Maybe he was seeing the same things I was. So one morning, after dropping the kids off, same wave, same gray drizzle, I walked up to him outside the diner. He had his hands in his pockets, staring up at the sky like it held some kind of secret. "Sheriff," I said, trying to sound casual, "we need to talk." He didn't look at me right away, just kept staring at the clouds like he was waiting for something. Then he turned, and there was this strange look in his eyes, like he'd already had the conversation with me 1,000 times before. "Liz," he said, "I was wondering when you'd come around." That threw me. I hadn't even told him why I was there, but he acted like he'd been expecting it. "You know what's happening, don't you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He gave me this small, sad smile and shrugged. "It's not the first time, Liz, and it won't be the last." Okay, that wasn't exactly the comforting answer I was hoping for. "What do you mean, not the first time? How long has this been going on?" He sighed, like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Longer than you think. It's not just this day. Ashford's been caught in something for a long time. The Watchers, they call themselves. I don't know much, but I know they're behind it." "The Watchers?" I almost laughed, but it came out more like a nervous cough. "What the hell are you talking about? What are they watching?" He glanced around like he didn't want anyone else to hear, even though there was no one nearby. "Us. Our pain, our suffering. That's what keeps this loop going. They feed on it, Liz. Every time we live through our worst day, they get stronger. We're their experiment or plaything, I don't know. But they're watching everything." Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like some conspiracy theory crap, right? But the look in his eyes, he wasn't making it up. He was too tired, too resigned. "How do you know all this?" I asked, stepping closer. "Why hasn't anyone else said anything?" He shook his head. "Most people don't remember the loops. Not really. They feel like something's off, sure, but they don't remember the details. That's part of the Watcher's control. But a few of us, we see it. We remember. I've been stuck in this loop for longer than I care to admit. And the thing is, they don't care how much we know, because knowing doesn't change anything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, part of me wanted to laugh it off, to tell him he was nuts, but deep down, I knew he was right. The notes, the cracks in the day, it all lined up. Someone or something was watching us, and they were enjoying our misery. "So what do we do?" I asked, desperate for some kind of solution. "How do we stop it?" He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the answer in his eyes before he even said it. "We can't. The only way to break the loop is to give them what they want." "And what is that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Someone has to stay behind," he said quietly. "Someone has to live the day over and over, forever. The rest of us, we get to move on. But the one who stays, they're stuck. That's the price." I felt like the world was spinning beneath my feet. "You're saying someone has to volunteer to be trapped? Just forever?" He nodded, his face grim. "It's the only way. One person sacrifices themselves and the rest of us go free. It's been done before, but, well, here we are again. The Watchers always find a way to start the loop over." I didn't know what to say. I mean, how do you even respond to something like that? Part of me wanted to run, to pretend I hadn't heard any of it. But deep down, I knew what was coming. I knew what the Watchers wanted. And I knew I couldn't let my kids stay trapped in this nightmare forever. Sheriff Miller must have seen the look on my face, because he put a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm but not exactly comforting. "Don't make any decisions yet," he said. "Think it over. You've got time." But I knew. I knew what I had to do. And I knew that no matter how much time I had, it wouldn't change a damn thing. When I woke up the next morning to the same rain tapping against the window, I already knew it was going to be the last time I went through this routine. I didn't even bother with the alarm. I let it blare for a few minutes before I smacked it off. The kids were downstairs, bickering over cereal like always. And for once, I didn't care. There was something oddly peaceful about knowing exactly how your day is going to end. even if it's not a happy one. I drove them to school, watching Jake's half-hearted wave and Emma's ponytail bounce as she ran through the rain. I just sat there for a moment, watching the school doors close behind them, and it hit me. This would be the last time I saw them like this. I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I just sat there. I had made up my mind. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went through the motions, laundry, dishes, pretending like I cared, but all I could think about was what Sheriff Miller had said. Someone had to stay. Someone had to take the hit, relive their worst day over and over, so the others could break free. And let's be real, there was no way I was going to let anyone else make that choice. Not when I'd already lived my worst day 1,000 times in my head. I was ready. I headed to the diner like I'd done every day, but this time I didn't order coffee. I just sat at the counter, staring out the window, watching the rain come down. Clemens didn't even bother with the usual small talk. Maybe she could sense something was different this time. Sheriff Miller came in a little after noon, like clockwork. He slid into the seat next to me without saying a word. For a few minutes, we just sat there, the sound of forks scraping plates and the low hum of conversation in the background. "I'm ready," I finally said, breaking the silence. "I'll do it." He didn't say anything at first, just nodded, like he'd known all along. Maybe he had. "You sure?" he asked, even though we both knew the answer. "I'm sure," I replied. "There's no way I'm letting someone else do this. Not when I can. Besides..." I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Matt's gone. The kids, they need to move on. I need to move on." Sheriff Miller sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "It's not easy, Liz. You think you're ready, but living the same day, over and over, it wears on you. It's not just about the pain, it's the monotony, the knowing there's no way out." I looked at him, dead serious. "I've been living that day for a year, Sheriff. I've been stuck in this loop long before the Watchers had their claws in me. At least this time, I get to make a choice." He gave me a sad smile, the kind that says, "I get it, but I wish I didn't." "All right," he said. "There's a place, the old farmhouse just outside town. That's where it has to happen. That's where you make the deal." "Deal?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "The Watchers don't just take without asking," he said. "They need you to agree to it. Once you're there, once you say the words, there's no going back. They'll know you're willing, and they'll take you." I didn't hesitate. "When?" "Tonight," he said. "After 3:17. Of course, it had to be after the crash. I spent the rest of the day like it was normal. Picked up the kids, made dinner, listened to them bicker about school and friends like everything was fine. I soaked it all in, every word, every laugh, every moment, knowing it was the last time I'd ever get to hear it. That night, after I tucked them in, I lingered a little longer in their rooms. Jake mumbled something in his sleep, and Emma turned over, hugging her stuffed rabbit tight. I watched them for a long time, memorizing their faces, their little quirks. And then I left. The farmhouse wasn't far. It was this run-down, creepy old thing that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Perfect place for a supernatural deal, I guess. The rain was still coming down hard when I got there, soaking me to the bone, but I didn't care. I walked up to the door, my shoes squelching in the mud, and pushed it open. Inside, it was dark, cold, like no one had been there in years. But I wasn't alone. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them. The Watchers. I knew they were there, waiting, listening. I stood in the middle of the room, rain dripping from my hair onto the wooden floor, and I said the words, "I'm ready. I'll stay." There was no big flash of light, no dramatic moment where everything changed. It was quiet. Dead quiet. And then, I heard it. A faint whisper, like wind through the trees, only it was inside my head. Accepted. And that was it. I had sealed the deal. I was their prisoner now, their keeper, whatever that meant. The rest of the town, they would wake up tomorrow, and it would be a new day for them. They'd move on, free from the loop. But not me. As I stepped back outside, the rain stopped for the first time in days. The clouds parted, and for a moment I thought I saw something. Shadows moving, watching me from the treetops. I didn't care. Let them watch. I had made my choice. And then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., I heard it. The screech of tires, the crash. And I knew I'd be hearing it for the rest of my life. So let me just start by saying that going back home wasn't something I ever wanted to do. I mean, it's not like I was running from some big traumatic event or anything, but you know how it is. Life just happens, you move away, get a job, meet some people, and you don't really look back unless you have to. And for me, I guess my mom dying was that have-to moment. So, there I was, 35 years old, single, kind of drifting through life, and now suddenly back in my childhood home. I swear, the minute I walked through that front door, it was like stepping into a time machine. Everything was the same, like it had been frozen since I left. The old floral couch with the weird burn mark from when I accidentally set it on fire with a birthday candle. The cuckoo clock that hadn't worked in years, but still hung on the wall like some kind of useless antique. It was all still there, and honestly, I kind of hated it. It was raining the night I got there, which felt about right. The weather always matched my mood somehow. The sound of rain against the windows is supposed to be calming, but it just made the house feel even emptier, if that makes sense. I walked through each room, just kind of taking it all in. Everything smelled like dust and old memories, and part of me wanted to grab my stuff and leave, but I didn't. I mean, where was I gonna go, right? So, I stuck around. Unpacked my bag, and that's when things got weird. I decided to go through the boxes in the attic, to reminisce or whatever people do when they're trying to distract themselves. I was expecting to find the usual stuff, old school yearbooks, maybe some embarrassing photos of me in weird Halloween costumes. But then I came across this box labeled Tommy's Stuff in my mom's handwriting. Inside was a bunch of random junk from when I was a kid. Action figures, a baseball glove I hadn't thought about in decades, and then, at the bottom of the box, there was this drawing. It wasn't just any drawing, though. It was him. Shadow. I don't know how to explain it, but the second I saw that drawing, I felt something. I mean, it was just this black, blob-like figure with these red scribbled eyes. Pretty much what you'd expect from a 6-year-old's imagination. But the thing is, I hadn't thought about Shadow in years. He was my imaginary friend growing up. And I don't mean the kind of friend you just play with. He was, well, always there. Always whispering to me, telling me things I didn't want to hear, or sometimes things I did want to hear. I remember my mom hated when I talked about him. She'd always get that tight-lipped look and change the subject. At some point, I stopped mentioning him altogether, but there was this weird nagging feeling that he never really went away. Anyway, I stood there staring at that stupid drawing, and out of nowhere, I swear to God, I heard someone whisper my name, Tommy, Tommy. It was faint, like someone standing in the next room, but I could hear it clear as day. My first thought, I'm losing it. Stress, grief, you name it. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, right? That's what I told myself until I heard it again. I'm not saying I believed it was Shadow, but part of me, like some deep, buried part of me, didn't question it either. I just put the drawing back in the box, shoved the box into the corner, and told myself to forget about it. That night, it kept raining, even harder this time, hammering against the windows like the house was being pelted with marbles. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm, when I heard it again. Tommy. It was closer now, like it was right outside my bedroom door. I didn't get up, I didn't even move. I just lay there, thinking maybe if I ignored it, it'd go away. But it didn't. In fact, it got louder, more insistent. Tommy. That's when I did the thing I promised myself I wouldn't do. I got out of bed, walked to the door, and opened it. There was nothing there, obviously. Just the dark hallway and the faint flicker of the nightlight my mom still had plugged into the wall for some reason. I stood there for a minute, feeling like an idiot for even getting up. But as I turned to close the door, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, but not like a normal one. It was standing at the end of the hallway, tall and dark, with those same red eyes from the drawing. I didn't say anything. I just slammed the door and crawled back into bed. Pulling the covers up like that would somehow protect me from whatever the hell I just saw. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that I was just tired, but the feeling in my gut, yeah, it told me otherwise. Shadow was back, and I had no idea what he wanted. So, after that night, I tried to shake it off. Tell myself it was just some weird combination of grief, stress, and maybe some bad takeout messing with my head. But you know how that goes. Once something like that happens, it's kind of impossible to just forget it. Part of me wanted to laugh at myself for being so jumpy, but another part of me, this part I didn't even know still existed, was terrified. The thing is, Shadow wasn't always bad. I mean, he wasn't good either. But I used to think of him like a mischievous friend. Like the kind who dares you to do things you probably shouldn't, but you do them anyway because you don't want to seem like a coward. I remember being a kid and telling my mom about him. She'd always brush it off, saying things like, "That's just your imagination, Tommy," or "You're too old for imaginary friends." But Shadow didn't feel imaginary. He'd tell me to do things. Little things at first, like hiding my dad's car keys or sneaking cookies from the jar when my mom wasn't looking. Then it got worse. He'd dare me to push kids on the playground or tell lies to get other kids in trouble. It sounds dumb now, but back then, it felt like a game. A twisted game that only Shadow and I knew the rules to. I didn't realize until much later how much I was under his influence. Looking back, I think he fed off of it. Off the chaos, the mischief, the fear. Anyway, the next morning I went into full avoidance mode, which is basically my go-to when life gets too weird. I stayed out of the house all day, running errands that didn't need to be run, getting groceries I didn't even need. But when evening rolled around and the sky started turning that dark, purplish color like it always does before a storm, I knew I had to go back. I spent most of the evening in front of the TV, trying to zone out on whatever reruns were on, but my mind kept drifting back to that drawing, and to Shadow, and to all the things I thought I'd forgotten. At some point, I caved and went back up to the attic. I guess I thought if I could just face him, maybe it'd all make sense. I dug around in that box again, going through more of my old stuff. That's when I found something else. An old journal, not like a Dear Diary thing, but more like a notebook where I used to scribble random thoughts. I don't even remember keeping it, to be honest, but there it was, with my handwriting all over it. Flipping through it, I saw pages and pages of stuff about Shadow, conversations I had with him, things he told me to do. There were even drawings of kids I didn't remember, but their faces were familiar. Then, on one of the last pages, I saw a name, Billy McCrae. Billy was this kid from the neighborhood. We weren't really friends, but we played together sometimes. I hadn't thought about him in years, but the second I saw his name, it all came flooding back. Billy was the kid who went missing when I was about 8. It was all anyone talked about back then. Cops were everywhere, asking questions, knocking on doors. They never found him. And here's the thing. Shadow knew what happened to Billy. He told me not to worry about it. I slammed the notebook shut like that would somehow erase what I'd just read. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started piecing together these fragments of memories. Like, Billy and I had been playing in the woods behind our neighborhood the day he disappeared. And Shadow had been there too. I mean, not physically, but he was always with me, in my head, whispering. The rain had started up again, heavier this time, tapping against the windows like it was trying to get inside. I sat there in the attic, my hands gripping that notebook, and all I could think was, did I have something to do with Billy's disappearance? Part of me wanted to believe I was just being paranoid, grief messing with my mind, like maybe I was connecting dots that weren't even there. But another part of me, the part that still remembered Shadow's voice, felt like this wasn't just some childhood coincidence. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept hearing Shadow's voice in my head. Don't worry about Billy. He's safe with me. I didn't want to believe it, but it was like I could almost see Billy's face in my mind, as clear as the rain outside, and I knew something wasn't right. Not with Billy. Not with me. Not with Shadow. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized. Shadow didn't just come back for a chat. He had unfinished business. And whatever it was, I was part of it. So yeah, after finding that notebook and remembering Billy, things started feeling off. Like more than just weird childhood memories off. It was like every time I closed my eyes, I saw Billy's face, or Shadow's, or both. And it didn't matter how much I tried to brush it off, I couldn't shake that feeling that somehow I was tied to what happened. Not in a way I could fully explain, but I knew it was all connected. I didn't want to tell anyone. I mean, how do you even bring that up? Hey, remember my imaginary friend from when I was a kid? Turns out he might be real and might also know what happened to the kid who went missing 25 years ago. Yeah, no, people would think I was crazy. Hell, I was starting to think that myself. But it was all too real, especially when Shadow started making regular appearances again. At first, it was just little things. You know, I'd catch a glimpse of him in the corner of my eye or hear that whisper when the house was quiet at night. But then he got bolder. One evening, I was in the kitchen making some sad excuse for dinner, and I heard it clear as day. "Tommy, you've missed me, haven't you?" I didn't turn around right away. Honestly, part of me thought that if I ignored him, he'd just disappear like he did when I was a kid. But the voice didn't stop this time. It got louder, more insistent. "Tommy, you remember what we did, don't you? All those fun little games we played?" I don't know what made me do it, but I finally turned around, and there he was, standing right there in the doorway, like he had every right to be there. He looked exactly like the drawing from the attic. This tall, inky black figure with those red, glowing eyes that seemed to burn right through me. He was real, or at least real enough for me to know this wasn't just my mind messing with me. "What do you want?" I asked, which, in hindsight, is probably the dumbest question I could have asked. Shadow just stood there for a second, like he was waiting for me to figure it out on my own. Then he smiled. Not with his mouth. He didn't really have one, but I could feel it, this smug, twisted grin radiating off him. "We have unfinished business, Tommy," he said, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You still owe me." Now, I don't know what he meant by that, and I sure as hell didn't want to find out. But Shadow wasn't about to let me off the hook that easily. He started showing up more every night at the same time, like clockwork, right around 11 p.m., just as I was about to turn off the lights. He'd stand in the doorway or at the foot of my bed, watching me, waiting, always saying the same thing. "You still owe me." The thing is, I couldn't remember what I owed him, what we had done that made him think I was in debt to him. But the more I thought about it, the more flashes of my childhood came back. Little things, like the time I got into a fight with another kid at school because Shadow told me he was going to steal my lunch money. Or when I broke a neighbor's window and let my friend Timmy take the blame because Shadow said it would be fun. And then there was Billy. That one memory kept nagging at me, like a splinter in my brain. I couldn't quite get the whole picture, but I knew it was important. I just didn't know how. And every time I tried to piece it together, Shadow would show up, interrupting my thoughts with that damn whisper. "You still owe me." I didn't know what to do. Part of me thought about packing up and leaving town, just like I had all those years ago. But something told me that wouldn't work this time. Shadow wasn't tied to the house. He was tied to me. One night, I tried confronting him. I'd had enough of the whispers, the staring, the feeling like I was losing control of my own life. So I sat up in bed, stared straight at him, and said, "What do you want from me?" He didn't answer at first, just stood there, like he always did. But this time, he stepped closer, those red eyes burning brighter as he leaned in. "I want you to remember," he hissed. "Remember what we did to Billy." I didn't say anything. I couldn't, because in that moment, I did remember. Not all of it, but enough to know that Shadow had been more than just an imaginary friend. He had been controlling me, guiding me, and somehow he'd convinced me to take Billy into the woods that day. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I remember Billy screaming. And then, silence. Shadow had been there, pushing me to do something I couldn't fully recall. But whatever it was, I knew it had been wrong. The worst part, I didn't know if it was me who had done it, or if Shadow had used me as some kind of puppet. And now, all these years later, he wanted me to finish what we started. That's when Shadow laid it out for me. "You owe me a life," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Billy was supposed to be my gift, but you didn't finish the job. Now, it's time for you to make good on that promise." He wasn't asking for anything small, either. Shadow wanted me to kill someone. He didn't care who. He just wanted blood. A sacrifice to repay whatever sick debt I owed him. And that's when I realized. This wasn't just about Billy. Shadow wasn't done with me, and if I didn't figure out how to stop him, he was going to make sure I paid, in the worst way possible. After Shadow laid it all out, I didn't know what the hell to do. I mean, imagine being told you owe a debt, but that debt is someone's life. Not just anyone's life, but whoever Shadow decides. I couldn't just run away from that. There was no ignoring it. Shadow was always there, always reminding me, always pushing me, and I was stuck trying to figure out if I'd lost my mind or if this was really happening. I tried to stay out of the house as much as I could. Spent hours driving aimlessly around Derry, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. Didn't work. Every time I stopped at a red light or pulled into a parking lot, all I could hear was Shadow's voice. "You still owe me." I couldn't escape it. One night, after I'd had enough of avoiding the inevitable, I called my sister Maggie. Now, Maggie's the sensible one in the family. She's always been the practical, down-to-earth type, and I figured if anyone could talk me out of this, it would be her. Or, at the very least, she could tell me I wasn't crazy, which would have been nice. I needed someone to tell me I hadn't completely lost it. So, Maggie came over and I told her everything. About Shadow, about Billy, about the things I'd started remembering, and about how I thought Shadow was trying to control me again, the way he had when we were kids. I wasn't expecting her to believe me. I mean, who would? But the look on her face when I mentioned Billy, that caught me off guard. She didn't laugh it off or tell me I was being ridiculous. Instead, she went quiet, like too quiet. "I remember Billy," she said finally, her voice kind of low, like she didn't want to say it out loud. "Mom always said not to talk about him." "Why not?" I asked. This was news to me. Maggie hesitated, then said, "Because of the woods. After Billy disappeared, she didn't want you going back there. She said something about you having nightmares. About someone named Shadow." That's when it hit me. My mom knew. She knew about Shadow. Maybe not everything, but enough to be scared. Enough to keep us both away from those woods, and enough to bury whatever happened that day deep down so neither of us would have to deal with it. But that didn't explain why Shadow was still here, still hanging around like some unfinished business from my childhood. Maggie didn't brush me off like I expected. She even offered to help, which was more than I'd hoped for. She said there might be a way to dig deeper, to figure out what really happened to Billy, and maybe, just maybe, get some answers about Shadow. We started doing some research. I'm talking old school, library archives, newspaper clippings, the works. We found an article from back in the day about Billy's disappearance. Nothing groundbreaking, just the usual stuff about a missing kid. But there was one weird detail. No body, no sign of struggle, nothing. It was like he just vanished. And get this, Billy wasn't the first. There were stories about other kids going missing in Derry over the years, always under strange circumstances. The only common thread? The woods. It was late by the time we finished going through the articles, rain still tapping against the windows in that way that makes everything feel colder. I knew what was coming next. Maggie knew it too. If we wanted answers, we'd have to go back to the woods. I wasn't exactly thrilled about that idea. But part of me thought maybe confronting whatever happened out there was the only way to get rid of Shadow for good. Maybe if I faced it head on, I'd figure out what he really wanted. And maybe, just maybe, I could stop him before he pushed me into doing something I couldn't come back from. So, we agreed to go the next evening. Not like it was going to be a fun trip, but what choice did I have? Maggie was all in, though. She kept saying things like, "We're going to figure this out, and it'll be fine." But even she seemed a little off, like she didn't fully believe it herself. The next night, we headed out there, back to the woods. I hadn't been there since I was a kid, and the place looked exactly the same. Same old trees, same overgrown paths, and that eerie silence that makes you feel like you shouldn't be there. The rain hadn't let up and the ground was a muddy mess, but we pressed on, deeper into the woods. I didn't know exactly where we were going. It's not like I remembered the exact spot or anything, but something in me knew the way, like a gut feeling guiding us to the right place. After what felt like forever, we came to this small clearing, and the moment we stepped into it, I froze. This was it. This was where Billy disappeared. Maggie looked around, but all I could see was that day in flashes. Billy laughing as we played, me hearing Shadow's whispers, and then nothing. Just this empty space where the memory should be. I felt like I was on the edge of remembering something huge, something that would explain everything, but it wouldn't come. It was just out of reach, like the harder I tried to remember, the fuzzier it got. Then, out of nowhere, Shadow was there. Not physically, at least not at first, but I could feel him. That same presence, watching, waiting. And then, just like that, his voice cut through the rain. "Tommy, you owe me." I didn't know what he wanted, what he expected me to do, but I wasn't going to give in. Not this time. "You're not real," I shouted, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. "You're not real, and you can't make me do anything." For a second, it was like the world held its breath. The rain seemed to stop, the wind died down, and everything got still. Then Shadow stepped into the clearing. This time, he wasn't just some flicker in the corner of my eye. He was right there, standing in front of me, bigger and more solid than ever before. "I'm as real as you are, Tommy," he said, his voice like gravel, "and you will do what I ask." Before I could even process what was happening, I felt something shift. It was like I wasn't in control anymore, like my body was moving on its own. Shadow was inside my head, pushing me, trying to get me to act. I didn't know what he wanted me to do. Hurt Maggie? Hurt myself? I didn't know, and I wasn't about to find out. Maggie must have sensed it too, because she grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Tommy, don't listen to him," she shouted. "He's trying to control you." I wanted to listen to her. I really did. But Shadow's voice was so loud, so overpowering, I could barely think straight. "Finish what we started," he growled, and suddenly I knew exactly what he meant. He wanted me to do it. What I didn't finish with Billy all those years ago, he wanted me to kill again. I stood there in that clearing, soaked to the bone from the rain, feeling like I was being torn apart. Shadow was everywhere, in my head, in the air, pushing me, pulling me, demanding I finish what we started. And Maggie was right there, holding on to my arm, her grip tight, her voice breaking through the fog of whatever hold Shadow had on me. "Tommy, you don't have to do this," she yelled, and there was this desperation in her voice that snapped something in me. It was like I'd been on autopilot, and suddenly I could hear her, really hear her, and I realized I still had a choice. I wasn't just some puppet for Shadow to control, not anymore. But Shadow wasn't about to let go that easily. "You owe me," he snarled, his voice wrapping around my mind like a vice. "You've always owed me, and you will pay." I didn't know what to do, what to say. Part of me wanted to give in just to make it stop. I was so tired. Tired of the whispers, tired of the guilt, tired of trying to fight something I couldn't even understand. But then I looked at Maggie, standing there, completely drenched but not backing down, and I realized I wasn't that scared little kid anymore. Shadow couldn't make me do anything. Not unless I let him. I don't know where the words came from, but I shouted, "No, I don't owe you anything." For a second I thought maybe I'd done it. Maybe that was the key, the magic phrase that would make Shadow disappear. But all it did was make him angrier. The air around me seemed to thicken, and I could feel him, really feel him, like he was pushing his way into my mind, twisting my thoughts, bending my will to his. He wanted control. He wanted me to finish what we started with Billy. And then it all hit me at once. I remembered every detail, that day in the woods. Billy and I had been playing, like usual, when Shadow showed up, whispering in my ear, daring me to take things too far, daring me to hurt Billy. I didn't want to do it, but Shadow's voice was so loud, so constant, it was like I had no choice. He was in control then, just like he was trying to be now. But I didn't kill Billy. That much I remembered. I almost did. Shadow had pushed me to the brink, but something inside me, some tiny sliver of my own will, stopped me. I'd run away, left Billy there, and when I came back, he was gone. Shadow had finished what I couldn't. Billy wasn't missing. He was dead. And it was Shadow who'd taken him, or whatever Shadow really was. Realizing that, it made everything crystal clear. This wasn't about Billy, or even about me. This was about power. Shadow fed off fear, off guilt, off the things we tried to bury deep down, and he'd been feeding off me for years. All those little games, all those whispers, they were just to break me down, to make me believe I needed him. But I didn't. Not anymore. "You don't control me," I said, more to myself than to Shadow. "Not now, not ever." The wind started howling, the trees around us swaying violently as Shadow's form grew darker, more twisted. Those glowing red eyes seemed to pulse with anger, but he couldn't touch me. Not anymore. "You're mine, Tommy," he hissed, but there was something different in his voice now. Desperation. Fear. It was like he knew I was slipping out of his grasp, and he couldn't stand it. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not." Maggie squeezed my arm, grounding me, and together we stepped out of the clearing, back toward the path leading out of the woods. Shadow screamed, this horrible guttural sound that echoed all around us, but he couldn't stop us. He couldn't touch us. The rain kept pouring, soaking us through, but I didn't care. Every step away from that clearing felt like I was shaking off the last remnants of Shadow's hold on me. By the time we reached the edge of the woods, the air felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted from my chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. Maggie and I didn't talk much on the way back to the house. We didn't need to. There wasn't anything left to say. Shadow was gone. Not completely, maybe. He'd always be there, lurking in the back of my mind, but he didn't control me anymore. Back at the house, we sat in silence for a long time, just listening to the rain tap against the windows. It wasn't menacing anymore. It was just rain. Eventually, Maggie spoke up. "What now?" I didn't have an answer. I still didn't fully understand what Shadow was or how he came to be, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him control my life anymore. He fed off fear, and I wasn't scared of him. Not anymore. "I don't know," I said, leaning back in my chair, letting out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "But I'm done letting him control me. That's all I know for sure." We sat there for a while longer, just letting the quiet settle in. It was a different kind of quiet now. Not the kind that made you feel like you were being watched or followed, but the kind that felt peaceful. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe Shadow would come back one day, maybe he wouldn't. But if he did, I'd be ready. Because now I knew the truth. The real power wasn't in him, it was in me. And for the first time I wasn't scared of that. Not even a little. Thank you for joining me tonight. I hope you enjoyed this story and that you're feeling calm and at ease. As the rain begins to fall, allow the gentle sounds to guide you into a peaceful slumber. You can stay here, let the night wrap around you, and drift away. Or, if you're still awake, feel free to explore more stories hidden deep in the shadows. Good night, and sweet dreams.